This is an experience that occurred over several months. In the autumn of 2012, I was home from university one weekend. On the outskirts of my town, there is an old graveyard called the Red River Cemetery. It is very old. The earliest graves are from the 1790s and associated with an abundance of local history. The Great Revival of 1800 occurred there, the first camp meeting in Christian history. A lot of spiritual activity happened at that event. This cemetery is a regular spot for me. It is a pleasant drive into the fresh country, and the entire graveyard is surrounded by ancient trees. In the back of the cemetery is a reconstruction of a log church that was once there. You feel as if you are going back in time when you go there. It is serenely silent and still, and there is a nostalgia with all the graves and arrangement of trees. In the center of the cemetery is a separate walled graveyard. It is an elaborate family plot, and the old wall dates back to the 1830s. There are many graves in there, and one has sunken in and opened. Vandalism or other natural occurrence? Not entirely sure. I walked around the plot for a few moments. I had come here many times before, and nothing strange had ever happened. But this time, I felt an unpleasant feeling. It wasn't very strong, but I felt that I should get out of this plot. I did so and continued to walk around the cemetery. Then it started that night. I mostly had insomnia, but I did drift into sleep eventually. The line between the two is blurred, but I definitely know that I was awake most of the night. In lack of a better term, my mind was tormented. Seemingly out of nowhere, my mind burned with the image of these two particular graves in the back of the walled plot. It was scorched in my mind. I had nightmares when awake of these two graves, and never could I get my mind off of them. It was something I've never experienced before. The thought and image of these graves blared and blared in my mind, and I felt terrified. I knew I was awake, and I was afraid in my own home. I felt I wasn't alone. I covered myself in the middle of my bed with this torturing thought of these two graves. As the night wore on, the thought or nightmare, I can't recall which, I had a dream of the people buried there. I remember specifically seeing a man, young, but I couldn't tell how young, and his face was a blur. He wore brownish beige clothes, pre-1850-ish style. He may have held pale hair, but I can't recall specifically. He was a little heavy-set, not fat, just big. This image is crystal clear in my mind, and in my torment, I knew it was one of the people buried in those graves. This incident was absolutely dreadful. The next day, I was emotionally disturbed. My parents didn't know what to think. If I thought about my experience, I would start to cry. A few odd things happened that can be attributed to coincidence, but nevertheless odd. My dog was barking at nothing. Then the washing machine went crazy and started moving. The repairman said a part inside had gotten loose. It never done that, nor has it again. Again, this could be coincidence. Eventually, I put it out of my mind. It was disturbing, but I couldn't let it get in the way of my studies, so I carried on with my life. Then came the spring of 2013. I became curious again about those graves. I wondered just who are buried in those graves. I thought if I found out, some sort of mystery would be solved or a question would be answered. So I gathered my courage and went back to the cemetery. I found the two graves. They were there. I wrote down the names but misplaced the exact information, but the individuals were two siblings. There was a Jane, and she passed away when she was 28 and had 3 children. Her brother's name was Chatham. He died when he was 21 or 22 in the 1810s. They were the children of a Kentucky senator who is also buried nearby, and the site of their old family home is nearby. Nobody special, and I thought little of it. That very night, I woke up at exactly 3:30 a.m. Insomnia again. I had been awake for a few moments, and then my doorknob wiggled. I stared wide-eyed at it for the longest time. It had just wiggled. My first thought is that it was my cat. Sometimes she opens the porch door, then tries to open our doors. I prayed to God, please let that have been my cat, then I can sleep in peace. I convinced myself it was my cat, of course. The next morning, my cat was on the porch, and the porch door happened to be locked. Kitty had not snuck in, so I interrogated my mom, dad, and brother. They denied my accusations. They wouldn't do that. Then, the next night came, and I awoke again at 3:30 or 4:30. When I went to bed, my brother, who was in the den, right outside my room, was watching TV. But here, I was awake again, and I could see the light coming in where I could see under the door. Then my door opened. I heard the doorknob turn, and it slowly opened, about halfway. Then it began to close again, but didn't close all the way. Then there was a flash of light in the den, and it went dark. I stared at it for a while. I thought it was my brother because I thought he stayed up all night watching the show and opened my door for some reason. Thus, I wasn't scared, and I got up and closed the door. I attempted to go back to sleep, but was a little bothered. I asked him about it the next morning. He didn't know what I was talking about, because he swore he went to bed at midnight, and he has no history of sleepwalking. I did my usual interrogation, and everyone denied it. I was ambushed and became frightened. Later that day, I was on the computer and heard my mom scream my name twice, as if from outside, like she needed help. I rushed outside to get her aid. She was calmly tending the garden. She looked startled when I got there. "What's wrong?" I asked out of breath. "I heard you scream my name." She said she never did, and looked at me like I was crazy. She thought I was playing a joke on her. She'd never play a joke like this on me. Since this moment, nothing has happened with the incident. I even went back to the graveyard and got no bad feelings. It was a lovely autumn noon. Me, my parents, and my granny were on our way to visit relatives. Everyone was a bit on edge, as these family gatherings tend to be extremely awkward and competitive, so they thought it was the perfect time to express their views on political matters, which is always so delightful. For these reasons, I was rather annoyed when we arrived at the cemetery. Our final destination was visiting live relatives, although visiting dead ones can be competitive as well, as our culture has a knack of graveside landscape design. But my granny also wanted to pay our respects to the deceased because she can't go there by herself too often. I used this opportunity to keep my distance and to gather my wits before standing in front of the grand jury on matters of finance and romance. I raked the leaves and started looking about. I was pleasantly surprised to notice I felt at ease. Previously, I've always felt uncomfortable in graveyards, jumpy even. I started looking around, observing the old, shadowy trees, leaves swirling down. There are mossy graves with old German names, barely possible to read now, Lithuanian names. It's close to the border. Sometimes I would notice a name I have heard, probably from local gossip. I was mostly enjoying the nature, though. At that point, I think it's important to admit, I felt anxious and a bit depressed because of the visit, but the graveyard felt to me like a park. Graves, just like some monuments dedicated to soldiers. However, when we were about to leave, I approached the graveside, almost from behind. Suddenly, I thought to myself, a young girl. Then I got scared because I didn't know if it was really a young girl. I rarely visit there, and I've consciously memorized just our family spot, a few graves around it, and some grave with, I think, Lithuanian names on the way in because it is so close to the path, you almost step on it, and that makes me feel bad. The more I tried to brush the impression off, the more persistent it got. I don't really know how to explain it. The kind of presence I felt was like, it wasn't even physical. Let me give you a clear picture here. You are hanging out with your friends, watching a movie, laughing about this or that. Suddenly, someone says, "Oh, it's too bad John isn't here." And you feel like it would just be the perfect time if John was here, like he is truly missing at your party. That is the kind of presence I'm speaking about. You don't miss John's appearance. It's such a pity he's not here. The sofa looks awful without him. You don't miss any particular quality. You miss his presence, his being. That is what I felt. Like there was this presence of a particular young girl that I felt. It wasn't threatening or anything. I just got freaked out by my own old self. Then I also noticed, or perhaps before, I can't place these two in order because maybe that directed my attention to the grave, that a candle had fallen off the edge of the gravestone, and I felt I should have probably picked it up and placed it back. There was this little angel figurine too, and I thought maybe that was why I decided it was a young person, although I'm not sure I saw it from where I was coming. I don't know why. People just don't place angels on the graves of adults and elderly. Maybe it's because jobs and wrinkles don't seem angelic and old people mostly don't like flying. Sorry, couldn't resist a joke. I approached the front and counted the numbers that added up to 23 years. A girl. The graveside was neatly raked, not just raked to sweep away the footsteps from the sandy oil. Someone had even made ornaments in the sand in the traditional manner. I thought it was a perfectly good practical reason not to get involved. I was scared to do something awfully wrong and cause something terribly bad. I didn't want to ruin someone's thorough work, so I started stepping away slowly, having that internal fight with myself. I knew I had to go and put that candle back, but I told myself, come on, it will fall off again when it gets windy. Who cares? The candle's probably burnt out anyway. This isn't an abandoned grave. Someone will come. The grave was cared for. I can't go around picking up everything. As I later explained to my friend, I was probably worried that when you go to heaven, you still have to be preoccupied with order. I'm messy and I've been persecuted all my life for that. I hope when we die, we don't care anymore about such nonsense. I don't want anyone to visit me in my dreams, telling me to clean up under my bed. Finally, I rather unwillingly went back and placed that candle on the stone. I prayed to God to take care of this young soul and to protect me because I mostly had no idea what I was doing, so God had to take care of me. And as I walked back to the car, I suddenly felt really happy and warm around my shoulders. It wasn't the jolly kind of happiness, more like this, all is right kind of happiness. And it stayed with me until we found out my cousin had lost a lot of weight, which made everyone feel plenty of things. Thank you kindly for reading this experience. P.S. My granny saw me by the girl's grave, and she told us about her. It was some kind of tragic, unexpected death. I'm saying this because it might be that she had told me this before. The girl had died several years ago, as the grave was on the way out, and maybe I had unconsciously memorized it. It would be honest to mention this option. I just started experiencing whatever is going on, and it is really scaring me. A few weeks ago, my sister and I went to the local graveyard to test out this ghost radar I got in the app market for my droid. That's my phone, if you didn't know. I didn't think it would really work. It's just a circle with lines around it and a scanner, and if there is a so-called apparition nearby, a dot appears on the scanner in the direction it is. There was a slight breeze that day, and it was sunny. We got near the graveyard, and the scanner started going crazy. Dots were appearing everywhere, red, yellow, and green dots. The colors meaning the strength of the so-called entity, red being the most present and green being the least. A word or phrase appears at the top of the screen sometimes, like something to do with their death and whatnot. A large amount of phrases and words began appearing, some names and some frightening words like hanged or murder. The creepiest part of the whole equation was when a name appeared. The name was Peter. My sister and I started wondering if the Peter that appeared was an inhabitant of the graveyard. We started looking at gravestones, and we actually found one that said Peter Longs. It was a little scary, but then again, there is a lot of people named Peter in this world. We started talking to the so-called spirits. Like I said, is there anyone here with us that would like to share things via my radar? I started getting replies like crazy. Random words and phrases were blazing around like a wildfire. We then started to go home because it was getting near dinner time. Everything was good from then on for about 2 days. My whole family started hearing footsteps, knocks, bangs, etc. My sister said that she heard her name called, and then a bottle of her perfume flew off of her shelf and across the room. I later started seeing shadows and hearing muffled talking in the room next to me, even when nobody would be in there. Everything was starting to scare me, so I spoke out to them and told whatever was plaguing my family that it had to leave my home. Everything was quiet and back to normal until the next night, when I was laying in bed trying to sleep. I felt really cold. All of a sudden, and my TV turned on really quick, and then it turned off again. I went to my sister's room and saw her sitting up in her bed, looking really frightened. I asked her what was the matter, and she said that her TV turned on and off again. I told her that the same thing happened to me. We were both scared as can be, so I just slept in her room that night. The most recent and scariest experience I have was when I was home alone one night because my family was out at the store and I didn't want to go. I was just watching TV, and then the channel flipped. The remote was all the way across the room when that happened. Later, I got in the shower, and as I was washing my hair, I heard a knock on the bathroom door. The door swung open, and one of the knobs in the cabinet hanging on the wall fell to the floor. I was so scared that I called my mom, and I went to my neighbor's house until they got home. But are these experiences attributed to me going to the graveyard recently? I don't know, but I'm really terrified of all these events that occurred. But I guess in a way, it is kind of entertaining. Not in a good way, but an interesting one. Thanks for reading.